Okay, I'm going to do some final little adjustments to this Snyder's points before I offer it for sale. And it'll give me a chance to talk about some things that I noticed when I was reviewing the last video on delicate napping. One thing that's bothering me about this particular point is this thick barb here. So I'm going to send in a couple flakes, percussion flakes, into this area. And then I'm going to take care of the fat spots around the edge and see if I can make the outline more symmetrical, because these were very symmetrical on the edges. Okay, so one thing I noticed as I was reviewing the last video on delicate flaking was using the term abrading when I'm abrading with the tip of the tool. I'm going to call it scratching. And if I make a mistake and say I'm abrading with the tip of the tool, what I mean is I'm scratching. It is abrading, but I don't want it to be confused with abrading with an abrader, like a stone or an artificial abrader. I don't want any confusion there while I'm explaining. So I'm going to be scratching the edge with the tool tip, just like I do when I start notching. Just scratching the edge. I'm not scratching the edge right now, I'm actually flaking. But that's what I'll be using. I could probably come up with a fancier term, I guess, but I'm just going to go with scratching when I'm using the tip of the tool to dull the edge, or to do the work that a stone abrader would do. Now, I don't know if Snyder's had these little minute pressure flakes, so I'm going to try to get rid of those. The spatula tool is good for those. You just kind of scratch down with the spatula tool and it'll eliminate any small serrations or little pecking flakes. It simulates a wider tool without all the crushing that a wider tool can sometimes do to the edge, because there's not much contact with the side of the point. Now, why don't I use a fatter pressure flaker? Because with steel, it doesn't grip as well as aluminum or antler. So you've got to reduce the size of the tool tip to get a good seat. Because what you're doing is you're looking for the little flat spot, or it looks like a bevel almost, a bevel spot on the edge to push down on, or to push inward on. And sometimes they're very small, right? But if you have a flexible tip, it'll wrap around it. You don't have to be exactly on top of that. But if it doesn't, you don't have a tool that wraps around it, you have to be exactly dead on. Like with a steel pressure flaker, got to be dead on. And the smaller the better, because you don't want it to hit other areas. You don't want the tool tip to be hitting other areas, because it will flake where you don't want it to flake if the tool tip is too wide with steel. Okay. So I don't use antler for several reasons in my latest videos, and the main reason is it just takes a lot longer. It's a lot more nerve-wracking. it's not really something that I can use to produce points quickly. And it's highly expensive compared to steel. For me, anyway. It's probably just me, but I wear through antler and other natural materials extremely fast. So for all those reasons, I don't use antler in most of my videos. I also like to explore other materials just to see the differences. Okay. So I'm doing little thinning flakes. It didn't need to go very far. I just want to thin out this barb. I could use pressure, but a lot of times I break off barbs when I'm using pressure. Just because of the amount of pressure on the pressure flaker. This has more force, but it's faster, which means it doesn't shock the piece. I give the example just like whipping a tablecloth away from the place setting and have the place setting remain in place. You know, you can snatch away the tablecloth and everything stays in place. With indirect percussion, you're snatching away the flake, everything else stays in place. Okay, so to me that looks better as a thin edge. So I think the Snyders were thin, right? Okay, so I'll just finish picking at the edge. If you have any questions on delicate flint knapping, if you want to see more of that stuff, I can do it. So it might look like I'm resting where I'm placing the tool tip right on the edge, but I'm resting it on top of a flat spot. It's very difficult to see. Even when you're the napper doing it, it's very difficult to see the flat spot, but you can tell it's a flat spot because it's not going to crush. It'll seat, and then it'll allow you to put enough pressure on there to remove a flake. But if you're right on the edge, if you're right on a thin edge, you cannot seat the tool on it. It'll crunch too fast. You know when you're on the edge when it crunches down before removing a flake. That's how you know you're on the edge, and you're not supposed to be on the edge. Are there exceptions to that? Yes. What are they? When the edge is actually very rounded off due to abrasion. When you round it off with a braiding stone, the actual edge would be round. So then yes, you are putting your flaker on the edge or striking the edge with a hammerstone or a billet, like an aluminum billet or whatever, if it's rounded off, there really isn't much differentiation between the very edge and the surface. It's just all rounded. So in that case, I would have to say that you're hitting on the edge, because you don't know where the outer edge stops and the surface begins when it's round. Okay, so I have to say it's on the edge in that case, because you just don't know where the dividing line is between edge and surface. But when you're doing this kind of stuff and you're not abrading very much, or if you're scratching, or if you're abrading in such a way that it's just maybe in one direction or produces a bevel, then yeah, you have a seat and you are pushing off on the surface and not the edge. So I'm pushing off on the surface on these, even though I'm driving some of these inward. It's the surface of that slight bevel just above the edge, or just adjacent to the edge. So how do you know you're on the edge? It'll crush almost immediately when you try to apply pressure, unless it's rounded, and then it won't crush. You can apply pressure or percussion to a rounded edge. Just in case you missed it. Just in case you're like, say that again? What is that again? That's as close as I can zoom in. There's a spot where I can rest my pressure flaker right here on that little seat to drive a flake to remove that ridge down there. It'll help me remove that lumpy spot right there. And it's hard for me to see it, even with me as a napper doing it. It's hard to see. So I try to get away with the minimum time expenditure possible, but you can sit there and carefully pick and sculpt that seat. Okay? And that seat is the platform. I realize that it's not much, I mean, it's confusing, it's not really good. A seat is something you sit on, and a platform is something you stand on, but you get the idea. I took that flake off right there. Okay? So, a seat and a platform during my discussions is the same thing. But I use the word seat because when you have a platform, the more appropriate term would be, I would stand my flaker on the platform, because you're standing on platforms, but it doesn't sound right. But if you can seat your flaker onto a seat on the edge. And I do have a video with words explaining platforms, if you want to search for that. Okay, so I think I'm pretty much done messing with it. It doesn't need to be perfect. In fact, when you make it look too perfect, it looks modern. It looks odd next to real artifacts. Okay. So yeah, I won't mess with it anymore. All right.